great to see you all here. With some trepidation, I grip the machine and try to take hold of the situation. But what I'm going to do is, if this for some reason does not work, I'm just going to put it down and I'm just going to go on. Okay, so I don't want anyone to panic. It's not the end of the world. I can do it without the slides. Okay, but we're going to have a go. So the talk I wanted to give today is Atheist or Secular, Naming the Battle to Win the War. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about my story. And I think that it's partially because I'm one of those feminists who was sort of raised in the 1980s at university to believe that it actually was important that you know a little bit about me so that you can make your own assessment of the sort of things I say and decide how much weight to give them, because of course we all are to some degree subjective and impartiality is a myth and blah blah blah. So partially I'm telling you this for that reason, because I'm still stuck in the 80s, and the other reason I'm telling you this is because it is actually relevant to the things that I'm going to say. So I am, in fact, what I would call culturally Jewish. So anybody who saw Catherine's talk last night, her skit, her fabulous comedy, she was having a bit of a go at the idea of cultural Catholicism. But I actually do think there's something real about being culturally Jewish, and I can only speak about that. And that's because I grew up in a family of non-believers, generations of non-believers, and yet to me, to say I'm not Jewish would be the equivalent of saying I'm not American by birth, or I'm not now Australian, or if I grew up in Poland that I wasn't Polish. To me, it's about making a statement about my family history, which is not a choice. It's not a statement of faith, it's just a statement of fact. If you want to know my family history, you have to understand I'm Jewish, and that's where you'll find out where I came from. So I do think it's a relevant thing to say, and I also am a great believer in not throwing out babies with bathwaters, and I think that for whatever reason, and there's lots of interesting books about it, and I don't know if I believe any of the theories about them, but there's all sorts of interesting theories about why it is that Jewish people have been able, despite often being, and in fact I think always being secular, being able to contribute quite a lot to cultural things that we value. So there have been all sorts of Jews who have been part of the post-Enlightenment world doing good things, and I think it's fascinating to wonder why that's so, but I'm not willing to say that there's nothing of value within Jewish culture that may have contributed to that. So I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I also happen to be agnostic, so that may make me the only person in the room, I'm not sure. But the reason I'm agnostic is because while on the one hand I do believe the God of the Abrahamic traditions is patriarchal, egotistic, punitive, and just plain ridiculous, I also think that there are probably more things in heaven and earth than I can understand, or at least I'm willing to allow that possibility. So for me, saying I'm agnostic is not saying that I don't find all the proofs so far quite persuasive about God or the lack of God, or to say that I'm unpersuaded or have been offended or haven't agreed with everything that's been said in this room so far, but it's simply to have a bit of modesty, which I feel is appropriate, about the nature of the world and the tiny, tiny little mind that I see myself having in the larger scheme of things, and to offer up the possibility that maybe I don't know everything, maybe we don't know everything. Most importantly, though, I think in terms of this talk, I want to talk about the fact that I'm a political activist. Because when I was thinking about what I could offer all of you today, the thing that struck me the most was that I probably could offer something about how we could take all the intelligence and excitement and engagement in this room and try to move it into a powerful political fighting force. And I think if we don't walk away doing that today, we will have made a big error. So I want to just spend the next few minutes talking about the ideas I have about how we can make that happen. And the other thing I suppose to say about me and political activism, and the reason why I think I might have something to offer, I've actually worked with Lynn quite closely on a couple of political things, and mostly the stuff I work on is abortion, and it's hard. So abortion is a hard issue, and so I think is atheism or secularism or whatever we're going to call it. But I like to win. And I pretty much put my success down to that. I like to win. I just don't like to lose. So I don't just like to make my point. I don't just like to be right. I like to win. So what I'm going to talk about is in some ways about how I think we can win. And some people may think, well, I don't care about winning. I just want to say the truth. I want to say what I believe. All good and well. I'm talking about how to win. That's what I'm trying to talk about. So the question then, I think, and I think we've heard people today, so we've got a conference that's titling itself Atheism, and a lot of us are using the words atheist, and Philip Adams started this morning by saying, I am Philip, I am an atheist. But of course we've also heard the word secular. And both of those words are flying around, and I would like to put an opinion out there about which one I think is a better one. So I think what we need to think about when we choose the word we use is how should we define who we are and what we want? And how can we build the broadest, most inclusive social movement? And for me, what that means is a social movement that's capable of ending the fiscal, social, and political privileges enjoyed by the self-proclaimed representative of God on earth. So that's what I see as our objectives here. So if what we want is an end to fiscal, social, and political privileging of religious institutions and entities. So I'm putting that out there. I think that's one of the things that, if I was running the movement, I would say we want. And it seems like, from what's been said around on this, pulpit so far, that's an agreed position. I want an end to taxpayer funds going to support charities that advance religion. And those things are in quotes because that very much is talking about the Australian tax code and the way the Australian tax code, and of course Max Wallace has already enlightened us about all of this, and everything I know I owe to Max. But what I'm saying is that he's absolutely right that we need to have a go at the way in which the tax code is allowing taxpayer funds to go to support charities that advance religion. That is not a charitable thing, advancing religion, and I don't want to be paying for it, and I don't think anybody should have to. Absolutely. And I think what we want is strict adherence to Section 116 of the Commonwealth Constitution. And for the Americans in the audience and for others, it's definitely right to say that Australia does not have a Bill of Rights or any kind of formal notion of the separation of church and state. We have had a number of very, primarily one, but we've had a few negative court interpretations of what is essentially the same clause in our Constitution that has really let us down in terms of that sort of establishment. But there are things in 116, in the same way there are in the American Constitution, that offer possibilities for us. And those possibilities are these words, I think. So I think what we want is a strict adherence to Section 116 of the Commonwealth Constitution that prohibits the establishing of any religion and the imposing of any religious observance. And of course, ideally what we'd really want is to change the Constitution, have a Bill of Rights that enshrines the separation of church and state, but that's a big one. And it's always easier to work with what you've got, and to me those phrases seem to be positive and things that we could probably work with if we could just get some better understanding on the courts. Now, political secularism, in my view, that kind of way of phrasing who we are and what we want as opposed to atheism, I prefer it because I believe it demands creation and the enforcement of laws and policies that enforce the secular nature of civil society. And I prefer it because it's a movement that atheists, believers, and progressive clergy can support. So it's a way of broadening our base. And it doesn't, you can be right, but if you're in the majority, you're more likely to win. So part of when you think about how you can phrase what you're doing in order to build the broader space, it's trying to think about the ways of putting things which are in no way compromising what we want, but are enabling people who may think slightly differently to us to still be on board. So you can believe in God, you can be agnostic, and you can still believe that there ought to be a separation between church and state. I have very, very good evidence of this, in fact, because both times that I've been fighting political wars about abortion, I have been contacted, not by a heap of people, but by enough people who have said to me, Leslie, I am religious, I believe, insert religious view here about how abortion is wrong, my God tells me so, but I very much believe that these are my beliefs and that they should not be imposed on you or any other woman. We can work with those people. And I think we need to work with those people. So I very much think however we define ourselves, we need to try to leave out whether we believe in God or whether we're sure we don't believe in God, right to the left of it. Because you don't have to not believe in God in order to believe there ought to be a separation between the church and the state. And even so the case with things like the clergy. So it is the case that we have in Australia a Catholic priest called Father Frank Brennan, and you're all free to hiss if you like. And I could just get into really serious hiss about Father Frank, because when it comes to the separation of church and state and women's bodies, he doesn't believe in it. But when it comes to the separation of church and state on all other matters, he does believe in it. So for instance, we talked about earlier this morning this New South Wales state government imposition of a whole lot of very draconian regulations for World Youth Day. Father Frank actually stood up against those regulations as a violation of civil liberties. He spoke out very strongly against them, said they were contradictory to civil law and to Catholic canon law. I don't know about Catholic canon law, but definitely civil law. And again, I think these are people who we need to make sure we can bring into the tent insofar as we're building a movement that's actually going to achieve something. Yep, I'm onto it. In conclusion, thank you. Truly, what individuals believe about God and why they believe it is complex and private. Secularists don't need to go there to achieve our aims. Australians can, and many will, support a movement to secularize our democracy, regardless of their views on God. And I think what we need to do is we need to broaden our base and win. Thank you.